So actually, I have a lot of questions. It's so interesting what we're going to talk about today. So I'm very excited to just dive straight into it. Uh, okay, let's do this. Welcome. Um, Hello everybody, and welcome to the fifth episode. My God, fifth episode of Unboxing New Music with Boon Hua. And today we have an old friend, mine, Jon Lin Chua, and we used to study at Eastman School of Music together. We ate a lot of hot pot together, but we never had the chance to speak a lot about music. So I'm very excited to talk about her music and kind of her compositional ideas, inspiration, and processes, and especially her interest in Nanyin music, which I think is something that would be really really cool to just dive a little bit into that. So just to get started, would you like to tell us a little bit about how you got into music and how your path eventually leads you to different places? I know you studied at NUS for a while, and then you studied also in China for a while, and then eventually finding yourself in the icy,
Snowy city
snowy
of
lands,
Rochester.
correct, of Rochester, New York.
Well, I'll start with my early years. Well, I basically started learning the piano at the age of 6 with Miss Wu Li. You might have heard of her, that little old lady who played the Butterfly Lovers.
Oh
On
yes. Mm.
yes, yes, yes. That she's she's fantastic. When I was 6, of course, I think I only started learning because my cousin was learning. One of those things, and I'm like to tag along. Oh yeah, I'll just take lessons as well. But and you know what? I actually did not like it at all. I did not like the piano at all. Um, the thing about it was that I think it was great. I'm lucky to have met her because even though I was the sort of student who would never sit down at a piano and properly play, she encouraged me to sort of develop in other ways. Like for instance, she would encouraged me to make up my own words to the pieces I was playing. Or there was a little game that I would be interested in playing. I'll be like going around the whole room making sounds with different objects. And I'll be asking her, oh, Wu Lao Shi, what does this sound remind you of? Like, what does it sound like to you? So I think I think at that time, some of these roots were already taking, it was already taking root in my path as a composer, just that I did not know it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so of course I did not become a terrific pianist. I good enough to study it as a primary instrument in Eastman, but not terrific, I would say. And then after that, I did take up the violin as well. I think when I was 7 or 8. Again, I wasn't very interested at all, and it didn't help that my teacher was very fierce. So
Let's not name names here.
no, I don't even remember who it was anyway. But the first instrument that really got me interested in music was the erhu. For
Mm-hmm.
some reason, I think the sound of the piano to me as a child was very cold and like dong, that's it. I mean, I was just a little kid, right? And I think the violin, for some reason, maybe because I was using a child-sized violin, I don't know what the reason was, but just I never really felt entranced by the sound of it. But the erhu was different. For the first time, I was like, wow, what's this sound? It's so warm. It's like a human voice. It's so special.
Mm-hmm.
So that was really the first instrument that got me serious about this. So I started playing, and I started playing actually in a erhu class before I joined the orchestra in secondary school.
Mm-hmm.
And so I then I had some orchestra experience playing the Chinese orchestra. Along the way, actually, I've done so much, so I don't know how to make this succinct. Um, it almost feels like a past life to me. In fact, I have dabbled in many other things actually along the way, not just music. I had for a period of time I was very into like gymnastics, wushu, things like that. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, so music wasn't always like the most obvious choice, really.
Mm-hmm.
And then later on, I also musically, I was interested in everything, I did study a bit of Nanyin singing. I did I met a friend who who plays Hokkien opera, street opera, like a real street performer type of
Mm.
band, and then he was a percussionist, opera percussionist, and he would just pull me along for shows and say, hey, play with us. And like, I don't know how. He's like, oh, it's okay, just follow. And it's like a live show, you just start and you learn there and then what to do. So things like that. I've had plenty of such experiences. And of course, I studied philosophy. So I think all these things do play a part in shaping the composer that I am today. There's so much to say about this. I don't know. You have any more specific questions about this whole
How
journey? Yeah.
so when did the I remember reading that you had a performance diploma from Zhongyang from China
Yeah. No.
Conservatory.
That
When
is
did that
not.
happen?
No, that wasn't in China. That was actually the diploma exams in Singapore. Yeah.
Ah, okay. So you
Yeah.
took the exams for the instrument.
Yes. Yeah.
And
So basically, I guess it just means that I became quite proficient on the erhu, quite serious.
mm-hmm.
Getting to the point where I was like playing concertos and stuff, being at that level. But somehow I wasn't. I think I wasn't really. I now looking back, I think it's quite obvious it wasn't really the path for me. Just being a performer. It could be personality. I'm just not the sort who feels comfortable just putting myself out on stage. Yeah.
Then
The other thing
then
also,
when
yeah, I'm
sorry.
sorry. Okay. So when did I start composing?
Yeah,
It was
exactly.
it's a very unremarkable story, I would say. It started when I had to play a solo. Okay, and I could not find any scores for the accompaniment. So the obvious solution, just write it yourself. And I did that. It's terrible. And I don't think, like, now looking back, it's just absolutely terrible. But that's how I actually got started on writing music. So start by arranging little things for gigs and stuff, right? Start arranging music, and then more and more people go like, hey, that's not bad. Will you do something for me? And it just snowballs. You do more and more until like one day you find like, hey, I'm actually like doing this a lot. so so you just get started that way. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember the first time we met was I remember it was at one of the CCs where you were doing something, and one of my teachers, Miss Wang Yahui, she introduced
Mm.
us because
Yes.
we were going to Eastman together, and that I remember was kind of, it's I guess that was also one of those kind of snowball experience that people ask you to write, and
Yeah.
then now you have a whole show.
Yes, that was that particular production was a very interesting one. It was actually the gathering of all the major opera troops in Singapore, the
Ah,
major Hokkien opera troops in Singapore to
mm-hmm.
do a formal stage production.
Wow.
Yeah, so we got like all the opera stars, who of the biggest wayang stars, and musically there it was a huge storyline about like royalty, and there was murder, betrayal, everything is was in there. Three generations of the hero. Yeah, I mean, not three generations, like the three phases of his life, like from childhood all the way to middle age. And musically the instrumentation was also quite big. There was like a symphony, pit orchestra, a symphonic instruments with
Mm-hmm.
a little Chinese instrumental ensemble, and also an opera ensemble. So
Wow.
so that was a very interesting project. Yeah, that was when we met, and Miss Wang Yahui was the conductor for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a lot of good memories with her. And so then when did the time come for you to realize that I want to pursue composition and I want to pursue it at Eastman or outside of Singapore? Because it does feel to me like at that point you were dealing a lot with Chinese instruments, and so why not go to maybe China, where to me it seems more obvious.
I don't think I was really exclusively dealing just with Chinese instruments at it.
Ah, okay, I
Yeah,
didn't realize that. Mhm.
so I don't think I ever really thought of myself or positioned myself exclusively as a Chinese instrumental composer, which was why I thought, well, it makes sense to go to a place like Eastman, which has a great reputation. I mean, just stellar reputation in composition, right? And in Eastman, I think with your experience in Eastman, you see that composition is a highly valued activity, and playing new music as well. It was, you know, all these performers there, they're just like, when are you going to write a new piece? When are you going to write a new piece? You know, so it was
Yeah.
just a great type of atmosphere to be in.
I mean, this is not meant to be an Eastman plug, but I have to say I really got to experience so many, different threads of new music at Eastman because of how open they are. There are two new music ensembles, and this is kind of to the audience. There are two new music ensembles at Eastman. One is the school new music ensemble, which was conducted by Brett Lubman, and the other one is just kind of a volunteer group. So the students have kind of they form a council together, and then they all talk about what pieces they want to program next year, and then they start asking student members to take part in this. And it was a very student run kind of initiative, which was very, very helpful. And on top of that, there was also the graduate sinfonietta, where the graduate students have their pieces played by the students that were paid to do. So there was a lot of new music activity that really makes Eastman a very, very special place. On top of that, the whole family atmosphere that I think is really, unlike any other place else in the world. But sorry, I just took
No,
over
no,
there.
but I gotta say, as a composer in Eastman, I'm not lying when I say that every single piece you write will be performed. You will get a chance somehow to get it performed. So that was the great thing about Eastman. And of course, you had so many excellent performers. So it was a great sort of atmosphere to be in. Plus the fact that I got to study with so many great, teachers in Eastman as well.
And how was that? Because I know that at Eastman they have a system where you kind of rotate teachers.
Yes.
So you have different teachers every year, or how does that
Yeah,
work, and how does that influence you?
it depends on, usually by the year or sometimes by the semester.
Hmm.
But you could also, yeah, they would typically rotate, but of course there would be exceptions. You could apply to study with some teacher and so on and so forth. But the system was that you would just study with basically try to study with all of them if possible,
Hmm.
right? So the first teacher I studied with there was David Liptak.
Hmm.
Fantastic, of course, famous American composer as well as a fantastic person. With David, I think he was a teacher that really opened my mind to a lot of different musical influences, and for a composer who hasn't yet sort of determined, her direction, and what do I want to do and all that. I think he's a great teacher. And of course, he was so encouraging and very, very kind person. In fact, one of the kindest people I know, really. Yeah. The second teacher I studied with over there was the formidable Bob Morris,
Hmm. Yes,
right?
heard
Yes.
stories.
Well, yes, Bob. I think he's like the smartest person I know. Seriously, great intellect. The depth and breadth of knowledge that he has about on like pretty much any discipline is just astounding. And yeah, very formidable figure. We could discuss any subject from music to philosophy to math to mathematics to Buddhism as well, which was a common
Hmm.
interest between both of us. Uh,
Ah.
and with him, I think what I gained a lot from was what I learned a lot about was the sensitivity to pitch choices. Yeah, I'm sure you know Bob Morris as being very famous in the theory circles for
Hmm.
atonal theory and everything. I mean, this is a guy who can like listen to something and he'd be like, "Oh, that's like 611." It's like class 611. But so I and a lot of people think about composing with set classes as being something very rigid, right? Like, oh, you
Hmm.
are sort of confining to yourself to a certain like pool of
Artificial system.
set. Yeah, but it's
Yeah.
actually not that way, because when you think about um, when you get to know, especially smaller sets like trichords and tetrachords, you get to know them. If you get to know them as personally as you get to know different chords, right? Like, oh, the major chord has this sort of sound,
Hmm.
this sort of quality. The minor chord, diminished chord, augmented chord. Same thing for in 013, 014. They all have different sonorities in that same way, different colors. Just like you would think about colors of chords, different chords.
Right.
Yeah. So once you have actually grasped those things, then actually composing with sets isn't that rigid and inflexible as you would think. You actually sort of absorb it in and think of, I think with him I became a lot more aware of my pitch choices and really like why it has to be this and not that, things like that. Yeah. The third teacher I studied with was Ricardo John Modun.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All of them are so like wonderful that I just have to use superlatives. Ricardo is a master of color, I would say. As you know, he studied with George Crumb as well. Yeah, and this thing about Ricardo, he's so meticulous. He really zooms on every single detail, and I think in his own composition, I suspect he does that too. He would like write something and then go back to it and sort of tweak it again and again. So with him, I actually learned so much in terms of orchestration and really sort of using instrumental colors, putting them together and adding this one little detail that would make a whole world of difference.
Mm.
Yeah. And then came Oliver Schneller. At the time when I started studying with him, he was quite new.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just joined the faculty, I believe.
Yes, and he was pretty much a breath of fresh air to the faculty, I would say. Hailing from the European continent, and fresh from Germany, right? So he brought along with him that whole German style, not just compositionally, but the personality, the teaching style, and everything. So with him, I mean, he was very inspiring. I remember before he joined the faculty officially, he gave master classes and talks, right? I left that talk feeling like, wow, I gotta go compose now, and I think that's it says a lot about but I think for a student to meet a teacher like that is I feel really fortunate. For him, I learned a lot about shaping sound, the shape of a sound. Yeah, that was something I was talking about, shape of a sound, or things like spatiality, things like that. So yeah, I learned I gained something different from each of my teachers in Eastman.
And just kind of using this as a link to the first piece that we will play for yours. It's called Clos. And would you like to just tell everyone a little bit about the piece and kind of the play that it was based on and how much of that influenced you in the composition of this?
Well, Huis Clos is a play written by Jean-Paul Sartre, which is a French existentialist philosopher. Of course, when I was previously studying philosophy, I actually have a philosophy degree. And for those of you out there who know about the philosophy in academia, there are like two distinct fields: continental philosophy and analytic philosophy, and they're pretty much sort of very distinct categories where people identify themselves as like being in one camp or the other. I never really thought of myself as belonging to the continental camp, as I actually for my graduation thesis, I wrote on Kantian ethics. So that's, well, I mean, yes, that's kind of continent, but more on the analytic side. So for Sartre, he actually one of the continental philosophers that stood out the most to me. And well, for me, I don't want
to go into a lot
yes,
discourse on
but
philosophy, but how
yes,
does this particular play, kind of influence you in this piece?
yeah. Well, so like I said, I was very influenced by his, particularly by his text Being and Nothingness, and this play is of course one of the plays that espouses one of his most famous ideas, L'enfer c'est des autres, which is hell is the other.
Yeah.
Right. But I think I would say it's this piece itself is more loosely related to the play than it was to maybe the circumstances that my personal circumstances that I was in while I was writing that piece. Basically, I was suffering from a serious illness at the time, where I would be just in bed a lot, just resting a lot. So at that time, well, I guess I was listening to music and composing as well. And being in those, it's sort of like what we are going through now, right? Under
Right.
lockdown, yeah, sort of social isolation and confinement. So yeah, I think more or less that there would have been some link that way,
I
where
see.
yeah, that would have sort of influenced my mental state to some degree. But I wouldn't want to make too much of a personal connection that way.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, yeah. In well, it's more of like sort of just something that spoke to me at the time. Yeah,
I see.
certain emotions or certain ideas, and so I don't. Yeah, yeah. It's pretty much like the way the play progresses, right? It's just a lot of action and really
Circular.
going nowhere at all.
Yeah.
And at that time, I felt that certain circumstances in my life was also going that way, as I was coping with a very serious illness. So
Mm-hmm.
it was a quite yeah. I guess my mental state had something to do with that.
Shall we listen to this right now? And then let's talk a little bit more about Reclo after.
Yes. Sure.
Okay, let me just pull that out. And here we go. Wow. It needs like time to just, you know, let it settle. Um, I mean the left hand, I mean the three notes keeps, coming back, and I don't know, I was just thinking, was it kind of your way of like the three characters in the story just kind of going round and round as kind of tonal centers in some ways, right? Because all the it's not really elaboration, but it just doesn't seem to get away from these three um tonal centers. I don't know if that's the right word. What was did you have a kind of a programmatic idea behind the piece, or how how did the play translate into this? I mean, besides,
Yeah, I think it's always a bit dangerous when you borrow the title of and you associate your work with another artwork. And people
mm,
always be like trying to, oh, so is there like a one-to-one correspondence between this moment and
absolutely.
that, or how exactly does it map onto it? I would say that no, I did not mean for anything in here to be symbolic of
Ah,
anything
okay.
like, oh, the pitch G, no, 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 none of that.
I
But
see. Okay.
I think more of the loose idea of the general mood of the play, and of course the whole uh, dramatic uh, movement of the play, right? That you have a lot of little dramatic moments and that seem very,
Outbursts and then disappears.
yes, that seem very trivial. In fact, it could be just one simple word, or the door suddenly opening and something. It could be something that is so how can I describe those moments? It's as if when you say something like silence is deafening, right? You have a lot of these moments which are climactic and yet anti-climactic in those ways. So yeah, and I think you correctly identified that we have certain very clear features of this piece with all these ostinato patterns,
Hmm.
right? Persistent pitch centers, from starting with G and then migrating to B flat and then A flat,
And then
and then
A flat, right?
and then you have the low B flat. So, and they're all in sort of different registers. It's very clear. Uh, and of course, but at the last section, everything sort of coalesced together, and you have it going back. Like we really never moved away from anything.
Yeah, maybe this is a good time just to is it possible just to succinctly summarize what the this play is about? I mean, the kind of,
Ah, okay.
yeah, the interactions between the characters, so everybody has kind of an understanding.
Oh yes, sure. Yes, that's what we we have not gone into that. So this play by John Paul Sartre is about three. It features three main characters. Actually, the entire play only has four characters, and the fourth character is the valet.
Hmm.
So these three characters at the center of the play, they have died and gone to hell, right? So when they go to
Or
hell, yes,
this comfortable
and
place that they don't believe is hell.
yeah, they end up in this room together, the three of them, and they're like, okay, right, let's wait for them to bring out the torture instruments, and I wonder what's going to do. And all three of them, they have things that they're hiding, but they are unwilling to admit to it, like, oh, there's a reason why I'm here. And soon they find out that having the three of them together in a closed room is that they each serve as each other's tormentor and uh, and victim at the same time. But yet when the door flies open, none of them walk out. So
Right.
it's a very so and at the climax of the play, one of them shouts out, so hell is the other. So this is what hell is. It's not all the fire and torture instruments, but this is what hell is. So it's really being trapped in this place, but also voluntarily, right? they don't, none of them
Right.
walk out. Yeah, yeah,
And what does we clo translate into in English? Just the title
yeah. uh
specifically.
yeah, it could be, well, the common English title for this play is No Exit, or
Hmm.
behind I think from French you could say it's like behind closed doors,
Closed
or
door. Mm-hmm.
yeah, in camera or something. So there's all yeah, this idea of entrapment definitely is very much a part of it.
Right. And you felt it also at that point when you were composing this
Yeah,
particular piece. Yeah.
like I said, I don't think the circumstances of a composer necessarily always translate into the works they write.
Mm-hmm.
You could have a period of time where composers going through something, but then they write something totally that's very
Yeah,
different,
of course.
right? But I think to a certain degree, if certain things are always on your mind, and then you would be more inclined to
Uh-huh.
or you think in a certain way, or influences your mental state, perhaps.
Right.
And you
I
have a
just look.
lot of time to think through
Yeah.
these things.
I'm just looking at the comments, and
Mm.
Mario Fournier was saying is saying something like, it does feel like one is contained but has flare-ups, bursts of energy, worry, feeling, but still contained, and it's always contained. And how about the idea that the Huis clos is also the room, but also each person is that as well. Each person is
Yes,
kind of venting it up. That's a
yes.
very astute point.
But the
And
room
Chuck.
is symbolic in that sense, right? You don't actually need a
Mhm.
physical space for that. It's uh yeah, yeah. It's just merely symbolic, I'd say. Yeah.
Hmm. And Zhang Yi was also commenting about how he appreciated the different layers of music that have distinct dramatic characters, but
Mm.
still without kind of a program and a clear sense of stasis. And I must say, it's so difficult to compose calmness without it being just boring, right? It's such a fine balance, and I mean this is why I'm so in awe with composers, because I mean, as a performer, it's easy. I understand the concept and I execute the concept, but to find the craft to make these things come out without being too this or that, I find that it's extremely difficult. And I mean, I've taken some composition lessons when I was at Eastman, but yeah, it's nah. That's something I'm happy to not go pursue further.
I mean,
Um,
likewise, I don't understand how composers can stand. I mean, the pressure is so great. So I think it all has to do, your own individual personalities. Yeah.
mhm. And I was just wondering, during your time at Eastman, I'm sure you also composed some Chinese music. And how did the training at Eastman maybe kind of alter your composition methods, or augment, kind of your, like you say, all the teachers had something very, very specific, but still it really pushes your boundary tremendously after studying with all of them.
Well, actually, when I was in Eastman, I did not write any Chinese music.
But you were
Uh,
performing then, right?
was it?
I remember you were saying that you were performing with Ying Hao up in Toronto.
Oh,
Was
yeah,
it kind
yeah.
of the pieces that you've written before?
No. That was with the Toronto Chinese Orchestra, where we were
Mm-hmm.
guest musicians. But and I'm the current composer in residence. Yeah,
Right, yeah.
but no, at that time, I did not really write. So I attempted to start one or two pieces, and of course
Mm-hmm.
I did, other paid work, arrangements and stuff. But I did not seriously compose for Chinese instruments
I see.
during that period of time. And it's a very interesting reason. I think there's always an expectation that I would do that, right? I mean, like, why not? You're a player yourself, Why wouldn't you write something? But I think the more you're familiar with something, or just so steeped in that tradition, uh,
Mm-hmm.
that it becomes a bit difficult to jump out of that box and write for it. So I think at that time that was my difficulty, which is why actually I would consider the first real Chinese instrumental piece in my portfolio would be the one that I wrote upon returning. And yeah, I would consider that like my first real piece that I was uh, able to finally sort of step out and do something. Yeah, like I said, familiarity sometimes is a very difficult thing. You know it so well. You think
Yeah.
you can definitely do it, right? And there's that expectation to be like, oh, why haven't you done it? And it's precisely because I'm so familiar with it that it was difficult for me to do what has not been done.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. There's so much respect that you don't want to, I don't know, what's the word? To dirty that idea, the pristine quality of it. And it's always very difficult. I mean, as a performer, there are music that I really, really love, but I'm also a little bit exactly what you're saying. I prefer a little distance where I can be very objective and look at it in a different way. Whereas, some music that you're completely in love with, you don't know if you're adding too much sauce and salt and pepper in it. So maybe that's a good pivot into reminiscence. So that's the first piece you wrote when you came back, and that was for the Composium that the
Yeah.
Knee Music Company had
Yes. Yes.
organized.
Yes.
So would you like to just tell us about how the idea for that piece and how your association with Nanyin music, how did you kind of break out from the box and say, okay, let's do this?
Yeah, that was really difficult. I have to admit that it was a pretty last minute decision to actually write that piece. I came back for a while, and then I saw they had this competition. So I think the deadline was like what in April, and like it was a month or two before that. And I was like, hey, why not? Let's do this. And at that time, I was like, yeah, I want to write something, but I don't know how to approach this. And then it was only one day after visiting Xiangling Music Association where I studied Nanyin.
Hmm.
Yeah, so it's a Singapore Nanyin, one of the Nanyin associations in Singapore. Uh, that I suddenly thought, hey, I know this stuff. Can I do something with it? So actually, so incidentally, this piece, uh, the material that this piece was based upon was actually the first Nanning song I learned,
Uh-huh.
called Yuan Xiao.
I think there's a YouTube video of you singing because I remember
Oh
looking it
no,
up.
no, no! Seriously?
Yes, yes, it was you singing.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Um. Well. Yeah. So I didn't even know that was on YouTube. Oh goodness.
I'll link it later.
No, no, no! Please don't. No, no, no! Please don't! Please don't! Oh, it's terrible. I think I could have done better. But anyway, that was the first piece I learned to sing, and so I borrowed not just that as a source material, but a lot of for this piece. I think I wanted to do something more than just superficially sort of use the melody and then add stuff to it, right? Which is
Right.
what is very commonly done
Mm-hmm.
for folk music, folk inspired pieces. What I actually wanted to do was to really bring in some of the concepts of Nanyin performance and Nanyin music, really, the general characteristics of that music
Mm-hmm.
into this piece. So I think there was the Nanning ensemble is a very special ensemble. The four melodic instruments. So we have the Nanyin Dongxiao, which is the vertical bamboo flute.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the shakuhachi, really. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's actually pretty much similar, if not the same. Yeah, yeah. And then there's the erxian, which is a bowed string instrument, a fiddle. And then the two plucked string instruments are the Nanyin pipa, which is modally tuned. It's not like the orchestral pipa. It's a
Ah, okay.
Yeah, it's a modal. It's a very it's like the Japanese biwa.
Mm-hmm.
So the Japanese instruments actually pretty much have uh, retained those characteristics from this ancient form of Chinese music,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then we have the sanxian, Nanyin sanxian, right, which is like the shamisen is also um, similar to that. So
Right.
these are very, very ancient instruments. Like Nanyin is like one of the oldest music forms in Chinese music and in the world, really.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So these four instruments, when you listen to them, you're not supposed to be hearing any individual component, but you're supposed to hear them as a whole. A sort of
Interesting.
composite timbre. And so you have on one side the sort of the line, the 线条乐器, right? The line instruments with the xiao and the erxian. So there's a saying in Nanning, they call it 消弦入消，逍遥弦. So you should be hearing like the sound is being like this, and you shouldn't be hearing like the erxian or the dongxiao on its own.
I see.
Yeah, and that also applies to the pipa and the sanxian, right? So altogether, they work as this perfect blend. So the idea of blend is not homogeneous, right? As we think in a lot of
Western cultures, yeah.
More traditional Western music, but very heterogeneous, where all four of them are completely individual, completely if you take them apart, they're, the individual characteristics really stand out. But they're supposed, your Nanyin musicians, actually the Nanyin ensemble, they train together a lot. It's supposed to be a lifestyle thing, and you play together as a group, that kind of thing. So
drink tea together.
yeah, I guess, where you really have that sort of culture where, so they have to become like this whole one ensemble. And I think that is very much the spirit of chamber music, right? That distinguishes chamber music from orchestral music.
Yeah. So maybe before we go into further details about Nanyin, because I have so many questions, why don't we listen to Reminiscences of Yuan Xiao, and so like everybody can have a sense of what you will be talking about. Okay, so let me just pull that out. Hey, maybe one thing we should have. Oops, sorry. Maybe one thing we should have done is to acknowledge the performers for both this piece and
Yes.
also yeah, so like my bad, and also Chloe.
Mm.
So do you want to talk about the
Oh.
performance for this recording?
Yes, this particular recording was done by 小巨人丝竹乐团 in Taiwan, the famous Little Giant Chinese Chamber Ensemble, conducted by Chen Zhisheng. And yeah, they did it this recording was from last December, I believe. Yes. So yes, and of course the fantastic piano recording is our friend Daniel Pesca, and I think Daniel is watching now. Hi, Daniel.
Hi, Daniel.
Yeah, he was the
The
one who.
formidable Daniel Pesca.
Yes, yes, yes. Yeah, he was the one who gave the premiere performance of this work, and along the way, I've had so many other recordings. All were so fantastic, and I think the interesting thing was that all of them had really sound quite different, and I feel like I was being specific enough in my notation, but yet the result that comes out is like three totally different recordings.
And that's
Yeah.
so beautiful, right? About
Yes, yes, definitely.
even with very meticulous instructions.
Mm-hmm.
So going back into reminiscence of Yuan Xiao,
Mm.
I wanted to maybe we can just talk a little bit more about, you mentioned obviously there's a lot of influences from Nanyin, and maybe you can just describe what is this kind of music making, what is the most important part of this kind of music making that's very different from what we're used to.
So like one thing I talked about was this whole concept of ensemble as from the heterogeneous point of view, a heterogeneous approach as opposed to homogeneous. But also, I think if you talk about what else I borrowed from Nanyin music, besides the source, the melody, and the sort of also this idea of a heterophony is everywhere in the piece. Structurally as well, the pace of my piece. Um, I sort of loosely base it on a traditional Nanning piece where you start off very, very loose, very, very slow
Mhm.
and scattered. The first few syllables take like ages to finish singing, like
Uh-huh.
so heavily melismatic. Um, and so, we start off this piece also very loosely, and then gradually you start to have a sort of pace, a sort of momentum picking up. So yeah, so loosely, the structure of my piece also follows that sort of structure of a traditional Nanning piece. Also, the pitch material, I do use this sort of like uh, it's a very interesting side of modal, very interesting sort of modal palette that we have here. So
Mhm.
it seems to go from the bottom octave. It's like A B C D E F sharp G A B. But then the ornamental pitches, we have pitches like C sharp,
B
which is
flat and
not,
all that, yeah.
yeah, but it's not written in the Nanyin skeletal score itself. Is what is ornamented by the singer and the xiao and all that.
Mm-hmm.
So that yeah, the C sharp, D, so on and so forth. So I in that in the only homophonic passage in that piece, I did collapse these pitches together and form the harmonies in that passage. But yeah, but the pitch material, besides the modal pitches, I also have coloristic pitches, right? Things that help to sort of flavor some of the
Mm.
notes in there, some of the pitches in there. Also, I have some very very characteristic non-ing gestures, like that whole accelerando gesture, the tang
Mm.
tang 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 tang. That is the usual way any non-ing piece starts. All right, is they do sort of like a accelerando type of tremolando. So I experimented with
Yeah.
sort of writing it in different ways. If I annotated it as like specific rhythms and different types of specific rhythms, right? Different types of rhythmic accelerandos, but also there was some that I just like wrote accelerando with the total duration on top, you know. So yeah, these are all sort of like, and some of the slides, of course, some of the ornamentation are all written in as well and borrowed from what the Nanyin performers would do. Yeah, so
Would you say a lot of these kind of it's really kind of oral tradition that you look at a phrase and you know what are the figurations or how you color certain things even though it's not written. And that was kind of my experience
yes.
when like I did this thing this conducting masterclass with SCO last year, and I was starting to look at a lot more Chinese music. And what really blows my mind in some ways is what's on the page is not what I hear, but there's a characteristic flavor, a distinctive flavor that you cannot replicate. That
Yes.
it's difficult to notate it, and yeah, it's just you just have to trust the performers to deliver the weight down, the taste.
Yes, I think this is something that my Erhu training actually benefited
Mm,
me a lot in, because you find that, but I think for any instrumentalist, right, any performer, you find that at a certain level, when you're practicing, you're not trying to get the pictures and rhythms anymore, right? That's really not the focus. It's everything else that you're practicing for. Every single articulation, every single, the delivery of all these details, right? Every single dynamic, micro articulations, micro, like how you manage time, right? And how to execute that technically. But I think in terms of learning in learning Chinese music, I think it's a lot more, you see a lot more of it because there's a whole performance tradition associated with how you do certain things. A slide, for instance, a slide in a certain southern genre, Jiangnan Shizhu type of genre, or Cantonese music kind of genre, is totally different from how you would do it in a Dongbei piece or a Xibei piece. Totally like, and every single parameter from the angularity of the slide, the timing, how much time you give to the front portion, the middle portion, and the transition portion, the 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 degree of it, like how large the interval of the slide would be, and at the same time coordinating with the dynamic level, at each part of the slide, everything is taken into account. And so there is a huge performance tradition, all the microtonal inflections as well, right? So all those
mm-hmm.
things are all performance tradition. If you want to really get it right, you see a simple slide on the page, it even can be written out. There are like millions of ways to play it, and
Right.
each performance tradition has its own not correct way, but maybe
Distinctive.
there are few correct ways, but there's also definitely the wrong way,
Right.
yeah,
By
there
adding
may
too
be,
much.
yeah, there might be no one correct way, but there's definitely a wrong way to do it.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of like hearing unnatural music playing, even though I'm doing the forte, I'm doing the piano, but it just sounds unnatural because you can't explain it. It just doesn't sound right. And I'm curious about this idea. You talked about kind of this amateur music making, and particular in because you said it's kind of lifestyle, right? People get together, Nanning music, people get together, people play together, and people meet on a very regular basis. So it's kind of a social thing as well. I'm just extrapolating. And how is that different from kind of like a professional ensemble where they can play this very quickly because of their skills, as opposed to coming together over a long period of time and kind of getting used to each other? Don't know if I'm being clear on
um,
that question.
I don't think it has to do, I mean, this is there are many, we're talking about many different things here. I mean, I don't think it has to do with, so you're talking about like whether it's born from a sort of chemistry that is gleaned over time, or
Hmm.
sort of just a terrific technical skills and sight reading. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, well, Yes, definitely. But I think this applies at any level, right? Even at professional levels, where you have ensembles that have either, well, not exactly the same people every time, but they have a sort of core group maybe that keeps the spirit together. And so even if you substitute one or two of the musicians, you kind of have that same energy in there.
Hmm.
So I mean, yeah, I'm not.
Yeah,
Mm,
maybe I did phrase my question correctly
mm,
too. But anyway, just to move along, would you kind of comment about kind of this the trend of Chinese chamber music, you know, with especially in Singapore, where it's really quite exciting with Ding Yi and with
mm.
the Teng Ensemble, and you were saying Xiong Ling Musical Association as well. Like how, you know, all this whole how is the trend, how is the scene like?
Well, I think we need to look at Chinese chamber music in terms of very traditional music and new compositions, right? So for very traditional genres, it's all chamber music. Basically, it's all about like Nanyin, or like what I mentioned, Jiangnan Shizhu. All this is the concept of Chinese orchestra. Really is a
Recent
20th,
construct.
yeah, it's a 20th century kind of construct really, and it's borrowed.
Mm,
The model is borrowed from the Western Symphonic Orchestra. So, but that has become that's I think that has become quite commonplace, and quite established as a genre already. Um, After all the traditional genres, okay, all the after all these traditional genres of Chinese music, that and then we're also talking about like chamber music in terms of like dealing with new compositions beyond
mm-hmm.
the development of the Chinese orchestra. So I think that is a very very new area that is still very is really fertile ground out there, still relatively unexplored territory, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and because I think a lot of us, you look at your first six guests, right? Like I think almost all, if not all, have had something to do with Chinese, have written for Chinese instruments, or have sort of been part of a Chinese orchestra in some way or other. And so for our generation of musicians, most of our interactions with Chinese music is really through Chinese orchestra,
Mm.
especially in Singapore, right?
Right.
Yeah, I think you might have the odd exception, but most of us come from a, if you play a Chinese instrument, you come from a Chinese orchestral background, and that informs a lot of your musical perspective, right? So I think this is where Chinese chamber music is concerned is very very new ground. But fortunately, in this region, we have so many uh, groups coming out and really advocating for composers playing works
New
by living
voices.
composers. Yeah. So
Mm.
yeah, as for now, I think it's up to us living composers right now to build on this genre, which is so there's so much opportunity for development. And I think the most important thing is that for me personally, I really like exploring this genre because of the space it gives each instrument to showcase its individual characteristics. And the same individualistic nature of each Chinese instrument um, is sometimes a liability when you are playing in a Chinese orchestra. Yeah. So I think when it comes to Chinese chamber music, I think then it really helps a lot. The liability becomes a strength. It becomes
Mm-hmm.
something that's very unique about each instrument.
Individualistic becomes good instead of
Yeah, yeah,
sticking out. Yeah.
yeah. When you
Yeah.
have a group of sonas playing together, you have a lot of issues with. I mean, you've conducted some Chinese orchestras, right? So you when you work with them practically, of course, when you have very professional musicians, the problems become a lot less. But still, you have some issues when you work with a group of sonas playing in unison, or group of dizi playing in unison, or a group of pipa. And you have to really work on those things. Um, But in the chamber ensemble, they can be as individualistic as they like, and that's what I feel.
Yeah, I think like one of the pieces that we talked about, The Entertainers by Chen Jin, really showcases every instrument
Yes,
kind of
yes.
just being themselves and not trying to fit in. Wow, I mean, we've spoken for more than an hour already, and
Oh, wow.
yeah,
I didn't even
it's
notice.
super fast. I mean, doing this is really a lot
Yes.
of fun because you're just talking, and then before you know it, an hour flies by so quickly. So I
Mhm.
just wanted to kind of wrap up to today's episode. Unfortunately, I know even though there's so much more to go, if there's any questions that any of our audience have, please, now is the time of whatever hold your peace. But I think what would be really interesting is we can provide some links, or Jon Lin, you can provide some interesting links to this kind of music, or maybe
Which
on
type?
YouTube or something,
What kind
of Nanyin music,
All right,
or
right.
some introduction to that. So, I mean, when I was researching for this episode, I was looking up a lot of things as well, and it's just so um, oh God, I can't find the word. For me, it's kind of like looking at my roots and what that means for me as a musician, a 20th century, 21st century musician, where I have to look into the mirror and identify who I am, and what my training is. Yeah, that's my son.
Yeah, yeah. I get that.
Yeah, so I thought that was really really interesting.
Mm.
Kind of process of discovery or self-discovery or even rediscovery.
Yeah. Oh, I want to add one more point. I also feel the difference when we are sort of like studying uh, some a type of a style of music from the outside as opposed to learning it from the inside, right? And
Mm.
this is totally different. Sort of you can study something so thoroughly and like memorize every single list out, analyze all the characteristics of it, and still not really get into it. It's
Yeah, I remember asking one famous conductor, Manfred Honeck, who conducts Pittsburgh and Vienna Phil and all these people. He was a member of Vienna Phil, so he's born Austrian. And I was asking about like Strauss waltzes, like how do you find the right feeling of
mm,
that? How do you find the right feeling of this kind of Viennese waltz, which is very, very, the idea of rhythm is very, very tricky. And he said, oh, just listen and yeah. So it's still kind of outside in. Whereas when I hear Chinese music, even though I never really trained in any Chinese music, but when I hear it, there is a weight out. There's a taste that
mm,
I just cannot describe it. I don't know how to describe it, but I know if this is right or this is wrong, or if
mm.
the the kopi is too sweet or not. You know it. Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
yeah. Anyway, I think we have gone super over time, and we would love to chat more in the future if we can have the opportunity. So I'm gonna take this time to say thank you to all our audience who tuned in, and sorry to miss out so many comments. But I think most of the comments are really kind of compliments for your music and hellos from everywhere. Wonderful. We have hellos from the US, from Canada, from different parts of the world. That's
Oh
really
wow,
wonderful.
wow, wow!
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And thank
Yeah.
you to all of you for watching right now. I'm so thankful to all of you. And thank you, Boon, for this lovely chat. We
This is
should have
wonderful. This is way
more
overdue. Yeah.
to do when we can.
Yeah, when we can.
Yeah.
Hopefully soon. Okay, so thank you everyone, and hope to see you guys on Saturday, where it will be my last guest in the first installment of Unboxing New Music, and we will have Tanya Yuting who will talk to us about her experiences studying in Chicago, and also her compositions for saxophone, quartet, and also for orchestra. So see you all.
All
Bye
right.
bye.
Bye.